So today we're talking about contours of risk, and it's a part of our theme of exploring vulnerability, possibility, and failure in scholarship of teaching and learning. So this is the first of three panel discussions, and today we kick off season 3 of Brave Conversations in Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, which is a collaboration between the University of Calgary's Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning and Mount Royal University's Mo-Kak-Keek Center for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And we do bring together an international slate of scholars to discuss ideas at SoTL's edges. So in this season, we really do explore those aspects of risk and the ways that that can be undertaken, taken up, and experienced by those engaging in scholarship of teaching and learning. My name is Erika Smith, and I'm an educational developer specializing in scholarship of teaching and learning at the University of Calgary. And I'm a co-organizer this year on the series with Jay Overholser, who's in the panel, and also in collaboration with our partners at Mount Royal University, Dr. Anne-Marie Dorland and Dr. Cherie Walmer at Mount Royal University. And in order to start things off in a good way and in a commitment to the process of truth and reconciliation, we would like to begin by recognizing that while we're joining online from a number of different places around the world, as hosts of this session today, we are located on an ancient and storied place in the Treaty 7 region. So this land is steeped in history and ceremony, and until recently was used and occupied exclusively by peoples indigenous to this place. So we acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Good Stoney First Nations. And the city of Calgary, where we're remotely phoning in from today, is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Nose Hill Métis District 5, and Elbow Métis District 6. So I'm very excited to introduce our panelists for today, who will be talking about the ethics of care and scholarship of teaching and learning. And in thinking about what kinds of brave conversations we wanted to have this season, we considered how risk-taking is often framed in celebratory terms as being entrepreneurial, innovative, or bold. And while that kind of risk can also have a positive connotation, we wanted to look at the more problematic or troubling features of that narrative. And so we started to ask questions that really prompted us to think more deeply about what might happen if we opened up and invited our community to think about risk in a more pluralistic or nuanced way, how we might understand risk-taking, innovation, and failure in SoTL in terms of change when we look through an intersectional lens. And what if we centered the lived experiences of those for whom taking a risk is not an abstract exercise, but really something that carries very real personal, professional, and emotional stakes? So as a part of this larger conversation in the Brave Conversations 2026 series, we wanted to explore and critically question what it means to take risks in SoTL. And our panelists today really consider how we can support ourselves and others in building communities that help us to really sustain and build rather than deplete those doing brave work in SoTL. So we're hoping to foreground ethical, relational, and emotional dimensions of SoTL and how that ethic of care can be a buffer as well as a catalyst for risk-taking. And with all of that said, I will ask our wonderful panelists here to introduce themselves, and I'll leave the slide up with their contact information and information while they're doing the introductions, and then we'll kind of be able to let folks have a bit of context around their roles and positions, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So perhaps we'll start with Jay, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, so my name's Jay. I use they, them, or these, your pronouns, and I am a fifth-year PhD candidate in the sociology department at U of C, and I also work at the Taylor Institute with Erika. And before I go too much more into like my background and things like that, I did just want to highlight one other thing that, especially with this panel, as we're talking about things like care work and ethics of care, this kind of work can't be colorblind or power blind. And so, especially as we're talking today, I wanted to highlight that the the positionalities that we've brought together today in the panel, the things that we're going to be talking about today are part of just like one much larger conversation. And we're really hoping that this series is the start of that larger conversation where lots of other individuals from different backgrounds can also contribute to this conversation. So I just wanted to highlight that first before we go too much further. But otherwise, much of my work tends to focus on things around gender and sexuality, and accessibility and inclusion, especially when it comes to teaching and learning. And so much of my background when it comes to the scholarship of teaching and learning and this care work sort of things is coming at it from this position of care and compassion and how we can use that to make a more accessible and inclusive learning environment, as well as how we can bring that kind of accessibility and inclusion into areas of research and things like that. So that's just a little bit about me, and we'll end up talking about more as we go along.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jay. Lisa, over to you next.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
You're
super.
good.
My computer is trying to shut down on me, so bear
Always
with me
at the
here.
best times that happens, right? Yes,
Best
we're
times.
good. We can hear you.
Best. Yeah, so my name is Lisa Taylor. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Education in the Faculty of Health, Community, and Education at Mount Royal University. My areas of teaching include physical and health education, teacher wellness, and land-based learning. My background, where I come from before I got into academia, was actually in the K-12 education system, where I was a physical and health education teacher to grades. Oh, I taught grade 1 all the way through to grade 12. And absolutely loved it. And so I also got into health promotion in school spaces as a sort of a community development approach in the K-12 area. And that became a real area of passion for me and has come into the post-secondary space that I teach in as well now. That focus of health promotion and wellness is really at the forefront of.
Okay, I'm thinking that probably Lisa's computer is restarting, even though it's obviously not the most convenient time for her. So we will come back to her. And luckily, we have Brittany here who can introduce herself while we're waiting for Lisa to rejoin. So go ahead.
I wasn't ready. I was listening to her. Yeah, welcome everyone. I see some familiar names and faces. Nice to see you all. So my name is Brittany. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a recent PhD graduate from the University of Calgary. I convocated in November. And so I recently started a SSHRC postdoc here in September with Dr. Jennifer Townhauser, who many of you likely know. Before that, I was supervised by Dr. Andrew Zito, who many of you also likely know. And so as that probably, for those that do know those folks, know that I probably predominantly focus on post-secondary mental health. And so my research focuses on not only post-secondary mental health broadly, but also my personal research is predominantly around suicide stigma reduction in the post-secondary setting. So really taking an applied social psychological lens to kind of make our communities more compassionate, more caring. And so the space that I kind of have connected in the SoTL space, because a lot of the research that I do connects with making a better community for students, and also bringing that into the classroom with, considering a mental health lens when we think about classroom environments, when we think about pedagogy, assessments, etc. So that's kind of, I think, why Jay had asked me to be part of the panel, and I'm really excited about that. The other thing I do want to note is before all of this, so, I've been at the university for a really long time, since 2012. I did my undergrad here. I was TA in the math department in 2012 or 2013. So I've been teaching here a really long time. But before that, I grew up in northern Alberta in Treaty 8 territory, very rural, 500 people in my little village. And so I'm a first gen, and I think that's really important. So my parents did not graduate high school. And so using the mental health lens in the post-secondary setting is something that I've thought a lot about, because it's hard for some people when the navigation is brand new, right? So I just want to bring that up before we get started. And I was trying to talk long enough that Lisa's back, and I think I see Elisa's phone. So I think that might be her, and I think I've talked long enough then. I was stalling a little bit too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
But
Well, wonderful to have that context. Are you
yeah.
here with us, Lisa?
I think so. Am I here
Oh,
now?
yes.
I'm
Yes,
on my
yes. We
phone. Yeah.
innovative solution. Look at just yeah, the good job for coming up with the solution on the fly there. Did you want to just finish up your introduction? I think you had ended off on the K to 12 piece, and if there's anything else you'd like to add, definitely welcome to add that now.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And sorry about that. If I could control the internet capabilities in my office, I'd have that on lockdown. Um, but yeah, so I spent some time in the K to 12 area, and health promotion became a huge focus of what I work to do, and that's working to focus on the students in the classes as well as my colleagues at the school, and our whole school community. Is a school community approach. So that work continues into the post-secondary setting, and health promoting universities as a framework for working to support the wellness of students and faculty and staff and the whole university sort of community. A teamwork is the dream work sort of, teamwork makes the dream work kind of approach. So that's the work that I continue to do. And with my focus on health and wellness, especially with the courses that I teach, it is absolutely critical that I work to demonstrate that as part of how I teach what I teach. So that's how I think that's why I got invited here today. I'm not really sure.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think that all of the background that all of our panelists bring and perspectives, I think it's just really well rounded. So thank you all for your time and participation today. So to get into the conversation component, I'll just go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can have a little more of an intimate conversation according to the feel and purpose of the conversation series. And I think we can start off by talking a little bit about what an ethic of care means to you each. If you wanted to talk a little bit about what ethic of care in scholarship of teaching and learning and or a classroom context means, what does it look like to enact that? I think that would be a really interesting place to start. So maybe I will look over to the person on my screen who is just the nearest to me, Brittany, and then we can kind of go from there.
Is it actually okay if I toss it over to Jay first?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I'm remembering now. That sounds great. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Sorry, Jay.
I'm going to steal the spotlight. Uh, yeah, so I think when it comes to an ethics of care, especially when we're talking about teaching and learning, and especially when we're looking at the scholarship of teaching and learning, for me, an ethics of care is really about, at the core, trying to create a supportive learning environment. And while supportive can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people, for me, a supportive learning environment is very much so like a very fluid and adaptable space that is meant to be this like caring space to encourage learning, to encourage connection between educators and students. And for me, just because it's supportive doesn't always mean that it's comfortable. So a big part of the work I do is kind of emphasizing discomfort not as something to avoid, but as something to lean into. So for me, a big part of ethics of care is the compassion that's needed to teach other individuals that it's okay to be uncomfortable. That discomfort is actually really important to grow and to become better and to actually make something inclusive for everyone involved. Because if we're concerned about making something comfortable, then we have to ask, like, who are we making it comfortable for? Who is it, whose comfort is not being considered? So a big part of ethics of care for me is using that compassion and that care to facilitate that kind of space and that kind of learning. And the other part that I'll just add for me is like it's a big part of recognizing our like seeing our students and seeing the endless possibilities of their future, and really working with them to help them realize those possibilities and whatever that might look like. So yeah, I'll let everyone else speak before I keep going on too much longer.
Yeah, I can add to that. So yeah, and I think when we started chatting about these sorts of ideas, me and Jay and Lisa aligned a lot on all these things. So when I switched over from, a TA, I mean, thinking about these things as a TA as well, but when I started switching over to an instructor, I really wanted to make sure that what Jay was talking about was pretty obvious in my class. Like, we're celebrating diversity, we're celebrating lived experience, but just like how Jay said, like, discomfort is where we grow and where we learn. We like to say, like, oh, we want to make sure that our classroom is a safe space. And I actually pushed back on that a tiny bit, not because I don't want it to be safe, but because we recognize that we actually can't guarantee that our classrooms are safe spaces because of the colonial, capitalistic, white supremacy culture that we have kind of cultivated in our spaces, often systemically. So I started looking around, and there's an artist and activist, last name Ramos, that their ideas really sparked. It was like, oh yeah, this is what I'm looking for. And they say that, like, you can never guarantee a safe space, but you can guarantee that your spaces are principled. So they kind of they have this idea of a principled space where, like, we're adhering to a set of principles that guide and shape the space, increasing the possibility of safety, but it kind of pushes back on, like, we actually can't guarantee that everybody is going to feel safe in a space that maybe isn't always designed for them, right? If we think about what the university was initially designed for. So we can do our best, we can be principled, we can make it sure that, no statements or actions are violent, oppressive, or deny the rights of and integrity of others. But I like to use this principled space. And so this Ramos, I really was like, yeah, this is it for me. And when we were chatting, I think it aligned with what Jay and Lisa were thinking about as well. So I just wanted to add that. I think I bring this up with my students. We actually create norms in the classroom, to be like, okay, are we okay? Is this what we're gonna adhere and treat each other with respect? And they like to be able to talk about that at the beginning, and then those are set for us for the rest of the term. And yeah, so I don't know if I'll maybe pass it to Lisa. She can add, and then if Jay has anything else, we can pass it back to them.
Yeah, and again, I'll just reiterate what Brittany said about how we kind of all aligned in our conceptions around what an ethic of care is and how that's actioned in classrooms. And so I guess a bit of context for me is that I frame the health and wellness that I teach and also work to live in my classrooms through a systems thinking lens. So if you think about like an onion, there's the core of the onion and there's multiple layers, that kind of expand out. And so while Bronfenbrenner talks about this as a set of Russian dolls, which is probably a better analogy, go with what he established. It begs the conversation around, whose responsibility is it to ensure that there's health promotion and wellness present in the post-secondary spaces? And the answer to that then, through a systems thinking lens, is it's everyone's responsibility. So there's a responsibility of the individual, right, at the core in this case of the systems thinking model. There's a responsibility of the microsystem, which is the closest sort of environment, and that would be, for example, me, right, the teacher, the instructor, working as a bit of a protective layer to support my students as well from the stressors and strains outside in the greater system. So there's responsibility on the departments, on the faculties, and on the entire university. So that's part of the justification around that. That's also aligned with the health promoting university's work. There was a recent book that was published by Squires, London, and Dolph in 2025, who are some of the trailblazers for health promotion in Canada. And they indicate that we absolutely need, strategic plans that identify policies around wellness in post-secondary spaces. We need leaders to model this work. And we also need to work to support those who are in classrooms, to do that work to support the students. And so there's an ethic of care is, to me, is making sure that I'm considering the power that I have in my classroom, and as a protective layer for the students, what can I do to support their wellness? Now, sometimes wellness is framed as making things easier, right? A little less intense. And I would absolutely argue that. Again, aligned with what Brittany and Jay mentioned, is that often conversations of wellness in my classes are framed through discomfort. So while we may have, and this is up to the students, the self-care is about what they do to support their wellness, right? If they need to go outside and sit on a park bench, if they want to go for a walk, if they want to knit, or whatever it is that they want to do to invest in their wellness, that's up to them. That's the individual system layer. But as a microsystem individual, what am I doing to support the wellness of students? And through part of the work that I do with students is to question, how do we experience wellness through discomfort? And some of that becomes about questioning our positionality. How do we arrive in the classroom that we're in? What are some of the power privileges that we experience, not necessarily by choice, but inherently, given the way that we arrive in our classes? And how do we be critically reflective? So one might call that, reflexive, so that we can position ourselves as learners with and among each other. And really, as the students that I work with now are teacher candidates, they're moving into a profession of education. How do I foster a space where they feel that they can be learners with each other, but also learn from their students when they move into the K-12 space? So I could go on, but I should probably stop there.
Fantastic points. And I think we started to pull out some ways that you're all enacting an ethic of care. And I was wondering if we could dive into some of those examples of practices and connections between teaching, scholarship, students as partners, and even a time when support, care, or compassion made a difference to you or your students. What did that look like, and what did that involve? So I'll just open up that question to folks on the panel.
I'll go first if everyone, yeah. So for me, one of the things that I keep coming back to is that caring is not something that is located at the individual level. It's something that we do in relation to each other. So a big part of caring, and especially in teaching and learning, is building those connections with each other, those relationships with each other. And it kind of requires this building of authentic, and I think, what was it, mutually vulnerable relationships between students, between educators, things like that. And from that, I'm specifically referencing this book about a queer and trans ethic of care and education that came out in 2024. But a big part of, for me, ethics of care when it comes to research, but also teaching and learning, is this relationality between us all. And part of that is kind of pushing back against neoliberal education, which is very transactional, which approaches everything from this one-to-one transaction, and instead looking at it more as we do this because we care about learning, we care about our students, we care about each other. And so rather than trying to come at it from a transactional lens, it's more about putting in almost good vibes into this community that you want to exist, into this space that you want to exist, not because you expect something back from it, but just because you want to create something better. And one of the examples that I'm really blessed to have experienced was, I was recently, and actually still finishing up, a SoTL research project, where it was a project between an faculty that I worked with, myself as the co-PI, and an undergrad student. And it was very interesting to have 3 different levels of experience in it, and approaching it from this perspective of, rather than being very hierarchical, very, we have the faculty with more knowledge and me in the middle and the undergrad from the bottom, is we approached it from, okay, we're all learning about this together. We're learning how to do this project. We're coming up with ideas together. And sure, maybe the faculty has more experience about very formal methodological ideas, but the undergrad also is bringing things to the table, and we're learning from them just as much. So a lot of that vulnerability and kind of working together and not necessarily thinking about how to maintain some of these differences between us, but at the same time still being mindful that we do exist within this much larger system that does place power over certain individuals. And I'm going to stop talking because I could go on for ages about this.
That's great. And Jay, just to say, there's interest in the chat about the book you were referencing as well.
I will pop the link in the chat. Don't you worry.
Yeah, I think there's many. I mean, we've given some examples of, like, in teaching, I think a little bit about maybe what our classrooms might look like. But I think, Jay's point about relationality, like when I think about, so I actually wrote about my values in my dissertation, which I know is not super conventional, but I wrote about like what my 3 values are because they do guide my research and my teaching and my life and everything. And one of them is relationality. And I think you don't have to like it can be, if you are relational and you care about your students, they know that. It's very obvious. And like you see them in, I have students, like I see them in the hallway. I know, remember their name. I ask them what they're doing. There's somebody in the audience right now, it was their birthday yesterday and we were at a breakfast place and my student was the barista and she came over and chatted with us and so it's things like that where it's like, I know at MRU it's a smaller university, so those things are a little bit easier, right? You have smaller classes, just a smaller, like we have 36,000 or something undergrads here. I can see the temptation of, we're busy, right? Like there's things, but it really makes a huge difference because I hear from the students every single year. They're like, you remember my name? You remember what I was doing? You remember? And I was like, yeah, like, of course, right? Because it's how I go into my classroom, right? I'm really privileged though that my class for the past few years, I've been teaching the core courses in our embedded certificate in mental well-being and resilience. And so it's an interdisciplinary group of students everywhere from hard sciences to psychology to sociology. They're from everywhere, predominantly social sciences, I would say, but definitely we see a huge range. And so I get to learn from them every day because there are so many things where I'm like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And I think being vulnerable with that, like, oh, I don't know all these things. Let's learn together. Especially when you're talking about big concepts like intersectionality. So one of the courses is intersectionality and mental health. And like, sure, I know the definition, I know the history, I know where it comes from, I know the power flower. We can talk about all these things, but I have 50 students in my room who all have experienced intersectional identities, intersectionality, oppression, privilege, all these different things. And so we learn as a group. And I think that I'm so grateful for that because I wouldn't be as good of an instructor. Our classroom wouldn't be as awesome if it wasn't a collaborative thing. So, yeah, I think one other example that I'll just give is more research side of things. So, during my PhD, I started with like, okay, I'm a social psychologist. So I'm like, I'm going to make a stigma reduction program. It's what I was kind of doing before that. And I learned very quickly that was not something I could do on my own. And so very quickly, I realized that I needed to create some kind of like group, an advisory group to help me to do that. And I had already, so sometimes it's like, oh, now you got to figure out who's on that group. But I had been making connections for years before that. And so it really came organically where I have 8 folks on the advisory group that support this research, that co-create with me. And because of my value of relationality, it all just fell into place, right? Like it was like, hey, you've been working with me and chatting about this for a couple of years, or you've been in my class and you've expressed interest, and would you be interested? And everybody was like, absolutely. And I was like, I can't pay you right now. They're like, no problem. But eventually we were able to give them a little bit of honorarium. So yeah, I think at the core, if you actually care about relationality, it all kind of like comes from, like, it seems like, I know, very meta, but like it does stem from that, and then it all kind of like works out, if that makes sense. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I have to say. I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Yeah, it's funny because we didn't talk about all of this in our prep, for this webinar, but yeah, one of my core values is also relational and care for community. And I also wrote about that in my dissertation, and that also comes into my research and my teaching. So funny how those things happen. And so I guess an example, Erika, you asked for an example. So one of the courses that I teach focused around wellness and teacher wellness. I noticed that students were really engaging with their screens during class, and I needed to design some sort of physical activity in order to get them to put things down. Otherwise, guest speakers, everyone, they were on their laptops and on their devices, and society's trained them to do this, so not critiquing them. But I thought, what could I do to better support the wellness of my students through the way that I work to live wellness in class? And I had been very lucky to develop a relationship with an elder on campus, so Elder Roy Bearchief from Siksika, and Elder and Dr. Roy Bearchief. And through some conversations, Elder Roy and I talked about how we might approach another course offering, which we've now done for the past 2 semesters here. We're just finishing off the second one, around using a two-eyed seeing approach, or embracing a two-eyed seeing approach. So embracing the strengths of, the more Eurocentric way that society functions, alongside the strengths, in this case, of the Blackfoot ways of knowing. And I applied for a teaching and learning enhancement grant through Mount Royal University. And, because we have a strategic plan that establishes the importance of supporting, the Indigenous ways, truth and reconciliation, especially that are local to our Treaty 7 territory, as well as the goals of the strategic plan that explicitly locate well-being in 3 out of the 10 goals. And that's with regards to relationships with students in class and knowing their names, and also the well-being that we foster, our students to take care of in our community, locally and globally. So I felt very supported with this application to work to really model that. How do we model, an international well-being or a local well-being? We work to listen to each other and support, each other, and embrace each other's uniquenesses and what may be different to us by learning a new culture. And so I received the grant, and the grant was solely dedicated to ensuring that there was funds in reciprocity and gratitude for the knowledge that the elders share. Elder Hayden Meltingtel has also joined us as well in these classes, in the design of these classes, and I would say that, based on evidence that I received from the students in their assignments, last semester, that we are working not only to support the wellness of one another, but also, as Elder Hayden has shared with me, that we're really framing a way of combating racism through this model. And I've had students indicate, that this has been life-changing. And so this is one example of where I suppose I recognize the importance of the learning that I also need to do, and my own reflexivity. As a first, I was born in Canada. My parents are Danish. They immigrated from Denmark in the 70s. And so I recognize that I come with Eurocentric norms and implicit bias, and how might I learn with the students, alongside the students. And I can tell you from my firsthand account that this has been life-changing for me. So that's one example.
Yeah, I think all of those examples are really powerful and bring to life that all of the different facets of ethics of care that we're talking about throughout the first part of the session. Is there anything that folks want to add to that conversation? Because I do have a sort of follow-up around some pieces, but just to invite the panelists if they want to jump in on any other pieces before we move on to the next item. Okay. All right. Great. We covered a lot of ground there, so that's great. So, because the theme of some of the Brave Conversations discussions this particular term center around tensions and risks that come up when we talk about our commitments to care, support, and compassion in higher education, I'm wondering if we could think and talk a little bit about how we might be able to mitigate those kinds of risks or tensions. Can we mitigate them? And again, how do we sort of see this working in higher education and in your own particular experiences? So I'll just open up that question and see if the panelists have any thoughts and responses.
Go first again. So one of the things that I find quite interesting when I'm talking to people about like this care and compassion when it comes to teaching and learning is oftentimes what I'm noticing is the individuals who are really doing a lot of this work are often the ones who are in the most precarious positions. So even when we're looking at this panel, like I know Brittany has a great position lined up that she'll be starting soon. And even with all of that, like we're all in various different positions that have some level of precarity to it. And even with all of that, like we all have certain safeties that come with being white, being a part of these institutions. But at the same time, it is interesting that a lot of the work is being done by those who are in more precarious positions, and you can have whole debates about if kind of those marginalized positions kind of make you more likely to engage in compassion and care or not. But I think one of the things that I always wish was being done more is that there was more support from these more stable or more secure individuals, people who have more institutional power, because it can be risky to do this kind of work. You're pushing back against an entire neoliberal institution, right? And it can sometimes feel like once you start doing some of this work, you get siloed into it, and it's all you ever get to do is you become the person who's pushing back against stuff. And so oftentimes when I felt the most supported in universities is when I have had faculty who are, tenure track or more established, and they're not even doing anything radical, just saying like, no, this is good work. I know it's exhausting. I know it feels like a lot, but you're doing really good work. And giving support when I'm not in the room of like, no, actually what they're doing is really important, or we should also be doing stuff like this. And just those little things that don't always feel like a lot, but they're so helpful because, gonna be honest, they're listened to more than I am. So that would just be one thing that I would bring up. But also when it comes to a lot of these tensions and risks, again, I just want to stress that like sometimes the care and compassion that we're talking about also has to be directed towards yourself. And a lot of this work it's a lot. And so sometimes you do have to realize that you might be the only one taking care of yourself, and you do have to factor that in. But when you are giving so much care and compassion to students that you're working with, ironically, they also support you a lot. Like I've had students come out and give a lot of support to me as a very new instructor that has allowed me to do further work because the students are so much more invested in that, and that comes across in a lot of ways. So that's where I'll stop for now. See if Brittany or Lisa have anything they want to add.
I can jump in if mine's kind of related, Lisa, unless yours is also related, then you can go first.
No, you go ahead, please. This order is great. We got a system here.
We're like we just like inadvertently, accidentally, hierarchically did opposite where like I like it. Yeah, I think what I was gonna say is like, yes, allies at like who have, some stability are amazing. I've been very privileged over the last decade to have those folks who have been in my corner the whole time. So that's amazing. And then being that for your students too, right? Like people are like, oh, can you write me a reference letter? And when I was a grad student, I was like, they might not care what I have to say. But now that I got that PhD behind my name, I'm like, yeah, now let me do that for you. Because now, unfortunately, sometimes that's what happens in certain circumstances where a reference letter might not have as much weight. Even if you have really great things to say, you might not have the credentials. And so it's about when we start getting that power too, is how we can use it to, ensure that like when I write reference letters, I'm talking about, academic rigor, but I'm also talking about self-care. Sometimes I'm talking about how compassionate they are. I talk about how they work as they were so supportive to their group mates. Like, I really make sure that like my values are like, it's a reference letter that's really broad, and showcases how this person is not just a good student, but a good human. And I think that's really important. And then what I think, hopefully I'm just going to guess what Lisa's going to talk about a little bit, but I think we also talked a little bit about when I talk about so I talk about universal design for learning and accessibility with my students, which obviously, again, really privileged that I get to have that aligns with the learning outcomes of the class I've been teaching. But we talk about this like strange intersection in academia of kind of accessibility, right? Like we want to be accessible. I think a lot about neuroinclusivity, and things like that. And then, but you're also students, you are accountable, right? And then this other kind of part is rigor, right? And we talk about these things of like, we have this kind of weird space where like, can we be accessible while still having rigor, while holding you accountable? And the answer is absolutely yes. But some folks would argue that like, if it's accessible, the students aren't being rigorous. The class isn't rigorous enough. And I've pushed back on that a lot. And I think, well, I mean, maybe Lisa doesn't want to talk about this, but I think maybe she might want to. So maybe I'll pass it on to her. Not to put words in your mouth, but
no. Well, I mean, we prepped for this meeting, right? So you had some context going in.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, academic rigor is a term that's used often, but not with a lot of clarity. So there are assumptions around, how that term is used, and absolutely, I've experienced this, right, where a focus on wellness seems to compromise academic rigor. An example might be that, a student has advocated in advance of an assignment deadline to indicate that they need a little more time to work to demonstrate their knowledge through the assignment. And my answer to that is going to be absolutely. You advocated in advance. You got yourself organized. You have a unique life, completely different from mine. I can't pretend to understand the social determinants of health, the different aspects of your identity and positionality that you may not even be comfortable sharing with me, right? So there's a way that I can provide some wellness in class by indicating that there is space for individual uniqueness. And I would argue that that is rigorous. And so in the context, especially of the work that I do through wellness and health promotion, I would be a hypocrite and actually not rigorous at all if I didn't make an effort to locate wellness while learning about wellness. Wellness is the work we do. It's a way of doing business. It's not an add-on. It's not compromising rigor. And particularly with the teacher candidates that I work with who are entering a profession where they work with young children, where we center kindness and compassion and relationships as the number one thing that's mentioned on the teaching quality standard in Alberta. I would be doing a disservice to my students by not locating well-being. So yeah, it's frustrating when the conversation comes up about, if I'm working to dynamically support my students, to, at the end of the day, work to achieve the outcomes that the students are. But I'm also aware that some of my students need two jobs to make ends meet so that they can be in class. And some of my other students don't need any jobs to be in class, right? And that's just one example of a socioeconomic aspect that contributes to identity and positionality. So, and I'll also touch on what Jay and Brittany alluded to as well, is that, I'm an assistant professor, but I have a limited term position. It's a 1-year limited term. And so there is an aspect of working to understand how this narrative, fits in, and how I'm not, how I'm contributing to my colleagues and to the department and this university community through health promotion. In a way that is also somewhat comfortable and digestible for folks. And so the other side of this too is, as an assistant professor in a limited term position, I do have that privilege in my classes, and how I, like Brittany said, write reference letters for my students, and put my foot down and say, yeah, I'm going to support your wellness by, and the assignment flexibility is just one example, right? Yes, I can do these things. And then the hope is that, and I am currently experiencing this with the wonderful folks I get to work with in the Department of Education, is that those around me will rally and say, yes, you are doing great work. We're so grateful to have you here. And the students tell us these great things and whatever else, right? So again, that comes back to that systems perspective, that it's everyone's responsibility to support each other's wellness, right? And what my colleagues do to support me and encourage me to keep on doing the work that is done, in literature backed by the strategic plan of the university. It seems straightforward and not something that would compromise things, but it can get my heartbeat going pretty fast and make me pretty nervous sometimes.
Well, thank you so much for adding those examples and bringing things to life. What I'm also hearing, in addition to the sort of balances between precarity and privilege that you're mentioning, is also that you're not seeing an ethic of care as an add-on or an extra part of your teaching and learning or scholarship practice, but really it's integral to it. And so I really admire all of the facets that you've brought up in the discussion that help bring that to life. And I think now we'll transition for the last 10 minutes of the session to some discussion and invite folks in the general audience to use your microphone or use the chat to ask questions or add to the conversation, have any comments to add or resources. We would love to hear from you. So I'll just pause for a moment and see if there's any folks who would like to add to that. Oh, and I see Adamola already has something to add in the chat. So thanks, Adamola. I'll just go ahead and read, and Manisha, I see you as well with a question comment. I'll read Adamola's first. Yeah, I just am reading basically an acknowledgement that each of you has given voice to what the place of rigor is versus a critical conversation about that rigor. And in other words, the question is sort of around, how does an instructor strike a productive balance then between ensuring academic standards, rigor, and excellence, and maintaining the classroom as a safe space? So thank you, Adamola, for that question. It's really, I guess, at the heart of it, a question around balance. So I'll open it up to the panelists on that question.
I can start if that's, unless you just want to start if you want to go, like, do you like consistency? I get that too. Well, I was just going to say, like, yeah, like I said, I say principled space, but safe space, as long as we kind of on the same boat on what we mean by that. But I actually see, so having flexibility, right? Like I have late bank days that they don't have to tell me, why they're using it or why they're going to be a day late. They just say they are, and they have 5. And of course, sometimes things come up with different people because they're all unique and maybe they need more, and we do that. But baseline, everybody has 5. And I think there's certain things where people are like, well, then everybody's going to use all of them, and it's all going to, like there's pushback on, like, when you start being more accessible, the rigor is going to go down. And we see that, like, at least half my class don't even use any. They only use it if they need it, and it's it's a comfort there. And there's so many things where, like, by adding accessibility, by adding a mental health lens, I actually see students at their best because they have that support, they feel comforted, they're able to think about these concepts, they're talking to each other. And so I think that it's not even, this balance. It actually makes them better students. It actually makes them more, rigorous. It makes them so I think by letting them actually explore learning in like an inquiry-based way, or in a way that like is supported, and they can make mistakes and it's not punitive, and they have all these chances to fix it before the final assessment. The final assessment is so good, right? And so I do a lot of scaffolding, a lot of conversations. We do stuff with group work. We do all of these things, and it's very supportive, but it's very clear from the beginning. I tell the students like that final project, like we are still in academia, and this is where you show me the goods, right? Like you show me what you've learned, and there is a rigorous rubric, and you are marked, but because they've been supported and they've been learned, and they could ask their questions and they could do all these things, like from the changes that I did in the 3 years to make it more mental health focused, to give them more scaffolded opportunities, those final projects are like amazing. Like they are absolutely amazing, like publishable infographics, a lot of them. One person made their own website, which was not it was not part of the assignment, but they made a website. And so I think like you start seeing this, like you start bringing this relationality, you start giving them chance to have discomfort, like they show what they've learned, and it's amazing. So that's what I wanted to share, is that I think it actually makes the students more like show their excellence more, in my opinion. So yeah.
Really quickly, just to kind of build off of what Brittany was saying, is I think like when I mentioned in the very beginning that for me, ethics of care is a lot of like seeing our students and the endless possibilities of their future. I think part of seeing those endless possibilities and making it evident that you see those possibilities and you want to help them achieve those possibilities, and that you genuinely care about their success, students just flourish. Like they are so much more invested, they're less anxious, and they feel more supported, and so they feel so much more of their energy can go towards being successful, and less of this like all-consuming anxiety and dread about university and education, things like that. So I think that's really important, and you can still have very structured guidelines, and you can still have rubrics, and you can still have assessments, but the fact that you make it clear that even with assessments, your goal is still their success, and you still like believe in them and their potential, just ends up making it so that way they feel like they are set up for success, and that they really can achieve that very rigorous work that we're expecting of them.
Yeah, and I'd continue to echo much of the same, right? Again, wellness is a way of doing business, right? It's not in addition to, and by providing space for students and flexibility in a student asks for an extension is really just one example, right? But like Brittany mentioned, the rubrics as well. The rigor required of students, if I were to define rigor as the quality of the assignment that's submitted, that doesn't change, right? It's more about an individual who indicates that I need additional time based on my situation to work to demonstrate to you what I can with my understanding and knowledge, to the best of my ability. And so for me to say no would be to indicate that I need you to demonstrate what you know now, and that's unfair, because that lacks consciousness for positionality. And I have found that through conversations with students and working to demonstrate vulnerability as part of this ethics of care as well, positioning myself as a learner, that I am learning through my students around my own implicit biases and what I don't arrive with, that they do, and this fosters additional care and compassion in the class. With one another, it builds our relationships as well. And so, yeah, that's what I would add on, is that, again, it would be really nice to see conversations of rigor locating the importance of wellness, especially given the Ottawa Charter, and the Limerick framework that has now reestablished the importance of wellness and education, and the strategic plans of our university that indicate, we locate well-being. So where is that actioned by everyone? How do we care and connect with each other and support the wellness of each other? So.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I am just noticing the time, and Manisha, I'm so sorry. I think we only have time for the one question. I'll invite folks. I'll leave the chat open if you'd like to put a comment or question in the chat. I know we haven't had a chance to get to all of the points, but so much rich conversation and so many places to go from this. I will say, please bring your thoughts and questions to the next session we have. This is a 3-part series. So I'll just highlight for you the next opportunity to engage. And we do have our colleagues and partners, Dr. Anne-Marie Dorland, Dr. Sheree Wilmer, online here. Session 2, and we invite you to register, is happening April 20th from 10 to 11 a.m. We're going to talk more about contours of risk, but that question that I saw in the chat from Julie around different levels of the institution and leadership, we're going to have Dr. Anne-Marie Dorland facilitating with Dr. Natasha Kenny, who is in a leadership position, talking about leadership and risk. Dr. Jennifer Bowman will be talking about educational development and that idea of risk and failure. And then Dr. Alyssa Council will also be talking about this at a sort of pedagogic classroom level. So we will continue this conversation. So please bring those insights and all of the pieces and thoughts and very thought-provoking questions that you have in the chat that we didn't have a chance to cover fully today to that next conversation. And thank you so much for everyone being here today and all of the engagement, and a special thank you to each of our panelists for adding so much insight really to the conversation and to bringing all of those parts of your experience and your knowledge to light. So we really appreciate everything. And again, a virtual wave across the river to our colleagues at Mount Royal University and to University of Calgary. And we'll see you at the next session. And I will say we also have a session 3. I think I see Peter Felton is in the chat. Our final of the 3 will feature Peter, Jay, and colleague Noreen Mumtaz from Mount Royal University. So we're really looking forward to that as well. That'll be in May. And actually, just before we go, Jay, do you remember, is it May? I have it here. The date I want to just flag for folks. I know I have it. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Sheree says May 7th in the chat.
Thank you, Sheree. So look, it takes all of us as a systems approach. Thank you. So May 7th, please also reserve that in your calendar. That'll be from 9 to 10 a.m. Okay, thanks everyone. We will see you then. And thank you again for the wonderful way to start off our Brave Conversation series.